Hello and welcome to the course again. In the previous videos, we learned about the details of assets, details of balance sheet, and then we looked at what are the details and some of the exchange listing requirements, some of the company law regulations in India basically, but these regulations can be different from country to country. So for those you need to refer to the company law or the regulatory authority requirements, which you will be knowing from looking at the financial statements of a listed company, because those are usually compliant with all the requirements. In this video, we will be learning particularly about some of the control aspects from the point of view of a reviewer, not from a point of view of user, because users may not have direct access to the detailed information, but the reviewers of financial statements will have some control over the details. So in this section we will be learning about those things, and then we will also be learning about what are the key assumptions or the drawbacks in the financial in drawing the balance sheet, which we discussed briefly in relevant sections while we were discussing the assets and liabilities. So let's look at it now. Some of the control aspects when you are reviewing the balance sheet are you just when you are reviewing, let's say, fixed assets, so what you need to know is there a complete listing of the fixed assets. You should be able to match the list versus the value which is represented in the balance sheet. A lot of companies, not about the listed companies but unlisted companies, small companies, they don't really have a complete details of the fixed asset item by item. So it's very difficult to judge that these balance sheet, the items which are the balance sheet numbers which are presented in the under the fixed assets are complete or not. Another control aspect from assets is the debtors. For example, like you need to be able to look at the aging of how old they have been. Are they old just only 30 days or 60 days, or they have been due since 120 days, or they have been due for over a year or over 2 years? If you are looking at that, you would have a more understanding of is there any possibility that you may not be able to recover your dues. So if that is the case, you should ask the management to make a provision for the losses. Otherwise you may not recognize the expense, and when they turn bad, that will be hit to your P&L. Investments also, we need to look at the fair value. If you have made any investments in unlisted companies, so you need to be able to see the results of those companies, that is it the fair value of your investments remain the same or more. If it's less, you need to be able to recognize the loss in current periods, so that your balance sheet or your financial statements show a true and a fair view of the financial position. It may happen that you have invested $100,000 in one of the companies or one of the investment schemes, but that investment scheme is not worth even 10,000 now, but in your balance sheet you are still showing 100,000. So that's not a true and a fair view of the balance sheet. But again, it depends on how big is the size of the balance sheet. Let's say your balance sheet is $1 billion balance sheet, where 100,000 is not going to make any material difference to the total or to the total financial position. So it's all materiality again. It all depends on how big is the size of the item that you are looking for, and how strong you need to control it. Another item is cash and bank. I mean, definitely you want to make sure that the cash which is represented in the books is physically existing in the bank, or is in your hands or in your safe. So you should be asking for account sheets. You should be asking for a lot of other supporting documents, so that you can have a complete understanding. Inventories you can control by looking at the list of the inventories, and then you can also look at Are there inventory items which have been lying in the store but are not being used for, let's say, 6 months or a year, which may be an indicator that the values are either those are not in fashion anymore, or these are not going to be used due to change in the process, due to change in a lot of other circumstances, or they might have lost their values. So these are the common control aspects for assets. For liabilities, most of the time companies make provisions, unnecessary provisions, to suppress the expense, suppress the income, to avoid the taxes being paid, or sometimes they just do it to make a fraud, because if you made a provision, it's charged to expenses, then it's a liability, which means you can pay. So after 1 year or 2 year, if they pay that money, the users may not be actually, the controllers or the owners may not even know about that money is going. You just probably be seeing that as a normal cash outflow. Here, that's why you need to look at the details of the provisions and how long those provisions has been pending, and what are the reasons of those, and how those are estimated, because those are not real. I mean, there has to be some basis, some firm basis for making the provisions or making the accruals or recognizing the liabilities. For borrowings, definitely you get the money, you get the contract, you recognize the borrowing, but are you recognizing the interest correctly? Are you paying the interest correctly? Is there any due? Because if they are, let's say, for collaterals, then you are at a risk of losing that collateral. Or if it's not collateral, it's a big risk on your credit standing. So your credit standing, if it goes wrong, then in the future, when you are going to borrow money, you may have to pay a very high interest rate. So these are the common control aspects. I'll be listing these common aspects into a Word file, in a notepad, and then you will be find those into the resources. Then you have the common pitfalls. So let's look at the common pitfalls. Accounting policies give a subjective view, like, for example, depreciation rate, for example, the valuation of goodwill, for example, stocks. They are not really represent a correct view, because there are some subjectivities into the research and development cost. You may be recognizing them as expense, but there is no value of learning. You cannot value the learning out of the research and development, right? So that may be a valuable when you are going to sell that research to some, or learnings to somebody else. You may be getting much more value than what you have been spending. Intangible assets like patents, goodwill, they are all subjective reasons. Depreciation is imaginary thing. So these are the common pitfalls. In the next section, we will be learning about more about what are the things that are not in the balance sheet, but they should be in the balance sheet. And what things we should be carrying in when we are looking at the balance sheet. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.